All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 6th edition. I'm in the middle of Chapter 21, which is on how to send email custom error pages and back button control. We have now gone over the how to use email, so it's time to jump into the custom error page in the browser, which starts on page 770 in the text. So, the author mentions here, when an error occurs in an ASP.NET application, notice it's not when, it's not if, because it will happen. So when an error occurs, an exception is thrown. If the exception isn't handled by the application, an ASP.NET server error page is displayed. That typically includes an error message, a portion of the source code that threw the unhandled exception, and other debugging information. Now, you typically do not want to show that to an end user. It's not appropriate, plus it could give hackers potential information that they shouldn't have. So typically what you're going to do is to go in and replace the generic error pages with your own custom error pages after you test the entire website, but before you go live with it. Now, there are 4 ways to display a custom error page when an exception occurs, and they're shown right here on the slide. So as mentioned, you can enclose the code that might generate an exception in a try block of a try-catch statement. Then you can redirect to your own custom error page if an exception does occur. Second, you can code a page underscore error method in the code behind file for a page. This method is called when an unhandled exception occurs on the page. Then, in that method, you redirect the user to a custom error page. Third, you can use the application underscore error method in the global.asax file. This is the method that's called whenever an unhandled exception occurs on a page that doesn't have a page underscore error method defined. Then that application underscore error method can redirect to a custom error page. And fourth, you can use the custom errors element in the web.config file to designate custom error pages. This is typically what you'd use for like a 404, which is a file not found error. So remember, especially if you've got some kind of unrecoverable error, you should go and display your own custom error page to inform the user that a problem has occurred. And it might be something as simple as just telling them, oh, something has occurred, we're sorry for the inconvenience, with a go home, or you might have a try back later type of thing. You often see that kind of stuff. Before the custom error page is displayed, C# code will often do other processing like recording the error in an error log or sending an email message to support staff to let them know, that some kind of an error has occurred. In Figure 21.9 on pages 772 and 773, they show how to use the properties and the methods of the exception class and of the HTTP server utility classes to get and use the exception object for an error. So this is the object that contains information about the exception that has occurred. So we've got message, which is a message that describes the error, source, which is the name of the application or the object that caused the error, and inner exception, which is the exception object that caused the exception at the application level. The methods of the HTTP server utility class for working with exceptions include getLastError, which gets the most recent exception, and clearError, which clears the most recent exception. So if we look at this example here, this shows how you can use a try-catch block to get the exception object. The next example here shows how to get the exception object within the page underscore error method or of the application. The next example shows how to access the server object in a file other than a code behind file or other than a global ASAX file. In this case, you'll need to use the server property of the HTTP context object for the current request to access the server object. In some cases, additional exceptions can be thrown. In that case, a second exception object is created. And that's what's shown in the last example here. So errors and error handling can be used and done in different ways. Many developers decide to create their own custom error handling class that they can call from any and all try-catch statements, or page error handlers, and or the global ASAX file. Another reason for doing this and creating this custom error handling class is so that you can process the exception as soon as it occurs. All right, and that's because the getLastError method will return null once you direct to an error page. So the code that you see here, and I believe it continues on the next slide, it shows a custom error handling class, which contains a private variable named EX, which can store an exception object. An exception object is assigned to this variable when the class is created. So this error handling class should process the exception before transferring to an error page. Again, because after redirecting, the getLastError method will return null. If you run an application with debugging and an unhandled error exception occurs, Visual Studio enters break mode and displays a dialog box that describes the error and provides links that you can use to get additional information on the error. Typically, that's referred to as the exception assistant. To continue program execution when the dialog box is displayed, you click the Continue button. Not all unrecoverable errors cause ASP.NET to throw an exception. Some error conditions result in HTTP errors that are handled by the server itself. For these errors, you can use the custom errors element in the web.config file to specify custom error pages. So again, the custom error element in the web.config file lets you designate custom error pages that are automatically displayed when unrecoverable HTTP errors occur. You don't have to write code to redirect or transfer to these pages. Here are some common codes. Typically 400 is not a good thing. So 401, as it says, here the client must be authorized to access the resource. Maybe you're trying to access a file that you're not able to access, you don't have permissions. 403, which is a forbidden request, which isn't a file, but it's some other resource that you're not allowed to access. 404, which is the most familiar, typically when you've got a broken link. And 500, which is an external or internal server error, usually the result of an unhandled exception. Now 200 are usually good, and 400 and 500 are usually bad. All right, even though I have not gone very far, and I know I haven't taken very long, that's the second part of the chapter. And the third part, which is the last 6 pages of the chapter, describe how to handle the back button problem. So for that, I will create a part 3 and be back with that last video for this chapter momentarily.